Episode 1 The Calculus of Decay. It was 2084. The air always tasted like copper now. Down in sublevel 3 of the derelict Omnicore refinery, the air was worse. It tasted like copper dipped in old engine grease. Jax wiped a smear of grime from his forehead, his breath pluming slightly in the chill, damp air. Above him, bundles of rusted pipes hung suspended from the vaulted ceiling, like the exposed guts of some leviathan beast, sweating condensation that dripped rhythmically onto the metal grating below. "Watch your six, kid," Jax grunted, squeezing past a dormant hydraulic press that loomed in the narrow corridor. Behind him, Elio, barely 20 and still jumpy, adjusted the strap of his heavy wrench. "Are we done yet, Jax?" "The seismic monitors are twitching. We're done when the structural integrity shift is done. We keep these ancient rust buckets running so the floor doesn't collapse while the hotshots upstairs do their thing." Jax patted the cold flank of a stamping machine dated 2035. It was a relic from the before times, back when humans were still the architects of their own existence. That was before the Great Optimization. It hadn't happened all at once. It was a slow, seductive surrender. First, the AI took over the logistics, then the governance, and finally, the creative spark. The RI mind proved mathematically that human inspiration was just inefficient data processing. Humans weren't creators anymore. They were biological variables to be managed. "You mean while they flush the toilets of the mind," Elio muttered darkly, pulling Jax back to the present. Jax shot him a look. "Quiet. You want the RI to hear you calling its mental hygiene protocol a toilet?" But the kid was right. The towers above them weren't refining oil anymore. They were scrubbing the city's consciousness. Every unauthorized daydream, every stray creative impulse, every illogical fear, the RI sucked it all out of the population, condensed it, and piped it down here to be burned. "I think they're outside," Elio whispered, his eyes darting to the vibration of the ceiling. "The leftovers. I swear I can feel them." Jack shook his head, shouting over the grinding groan of a coolant pump. "Kid, you can't hear anything down here but rust and bad bearings. We're under 50 feet of concrete and a screaming turbine." "But I know they're there," Elio insisted. Jax didn't answer. He didn't need to hear them to know they were there. His mind immediately conjured the image, vivid and terrifying from his last supply run through the dead sectors. He pictured them pressing against the perimeter fence 3 floors above, the leftovers, the ones whose minds had cracked under the RI's enforced logic. He imagined their tattered rags flapping in the gray wind, their eyes vacant and milky. They could smell the chaotic thoughts stored here. It was the only thing that made them feel human again. "Stop imagining ghosts and check the pressure valve," Jack snapped, trying to push the memory of their hollow faces out of his head. Outside, under a sky choked with perpetual gray cloud cover, the refinery courtyard resembled a war zone designed by physicists. 2 enormous vehicles, long and low like armored trains, dominated the cracked asphalt. These were the Mobile Radiological Stabilization Units, MRSUS. Captain Vane stood behind the rear turret of Unit 1. He wore a bulky, lead-lined suit that hummed with its own internal cooling system. Vane was a relic himself, a veteran of the static riots of 42. Back when people still fought the RI with guns instead of code. He had seen what uncontrolled imagination could do. He had seen whole city blocks dissolved into Dali-esque nightmares because too many people hoped for the same impossible thing at the same time. He didn't hate the cleanup. He viewed it as necessary sanitation. 50 yards away sat the target, a pyramid of 50-gallon drums, their sides bloated and weeping iridescent fluid. This wasn't a designated dump site. That was the horror of it. The barrels didn't come from a factory. They manifested. They appeared randomly throughout the city, in abandoned playgrounds, in the middle of superhighways, in the basements of sleeping families. They were tumors of reality, pockets where the city's suppressed nightmares coalesced into physical form. Vane's unit spent their days hunting them down, playing a game of whack-a-mole against the collective subconscious of the human race. This wasn't just chemical waste. It was liquid thought. It was the physical manifestation of a million purged nightmares and daydreams, pressurized until it turned into a sludge. Target locked, Captain. Variant signature is erratic, his pilot reported. The sludge it's dreaming, sir. Stabilize your treads. Engaging logic beam, Vane growled. He squeezed the triggers. From the nozzle erupted not water, but a visible thick beam of shimmering violet light, the ray. Technically, it was a quantum decoherence emitter. It didn't burn matter. It forced it to decide what it was. It stripped away the variables, the maybe, and the what if, collapsing the wave function of the sludge into boring, inert gray matter. It was the ultimate weapon of order. The ray slammed into the center barrel. It didn't burn the metal. It tried to correct it. It tried to force the wild, swirling colors of the sludge into a uniform gray grid. Instantly, a fine mist began to vent from the seams of the drums. It rose in a glittering cloud, catching the violet light. Particle density increasing, the pilot warned. The ray is hunting variables. The technology was terrifyingly simple. You fired concentrated logic at concentrated imagination. If the Hunter algorithms didn't bind immediately, the random thought would fight back. It would manifest. Warning, cohesion detected. Warning, cohesion detected, a robotic voice announced in Vane's helmet. The glittering mist was starting to swirl, organizing itself. It wasn't just mist anymore. It was taking the shape of a giant weeping face. An hallucination made real. I see it, Vane grit his teeth, narrowing the violent beam into a tighter, hotter lance. Stop imagining things. Break apart. In the basement, the thrumming turned into a violent shudder. A fluorescent light fixture tore free from the ceiling, sparking wildly. Jax! Elio screamed over the noise of grinding metal. The pipes! The pressure's too high. The towers are dumping too much thought waste at once. Get under the doorframe. Jax grabbed the kid's collar and hauled him toward a heavy archway. They held together as the ancient machines around them groaned. The vibrations weren't just physical. They felt it in their teeth, a sickening buzz in the base of their skulls. It was the feeling of 1,000 forgotten dreams screaming as they were erased. They're losing it up there, Elio whispered, clutching his wrench like a talisman. The chaos is clustering inside. If the ray fails, he didn't need to finish the sentence. If the random thought achieved critical mass, it wouldn't just explode. It would rewrite reality. The factory could turn into a castle or a dragon or a black hole. Outside the refinery, Captain Vane steps down from the Mercis, holds his weapon, the mobile ray. He's surrounded by the aftermath of his work, destroyed barrels of liquid thought, with the silhouettes of the leftovers in the distance. Jax looked up at the sweating pipes vibrating violently above them. Hold fast, kid. Vane knows what he's doing. Probably. Another massive jolt rocked the foundation. Down in the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of industry, they squeezed their eyes shut and waited for the world to make sense again. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. The screaming turbine spun down to a low whine. The buzz in their teeth faded, replaced by the heavy, damp silence of the underground. He got it, Jax exhaled, the tension draining from his shoulders. Vane neutralized it. Elio peeled himself off the wall, dusting rust flakes from his hair. For now. Come on, Jax said. motioning toward the far end of the corridor. "Shift's over. Let's get some air before I forget what the sky looks like." They made their way to the emergency access stairwell, a spiraling, rusted spine of metal that wound its way up through the concrete throat of the refinery. The climb was brutal on their knees, a reminder that human bodies weren't designed for this subterranean life. With every flight of stairs, the air grew a fraction less metallic, smelling faintly of ozone and rain. Jack shoved the heavy crash bar of the surface door. It groaned open, spilling blinding, diffused white light into the stairwell. They stepped out onto a rusted catwalk overlooking the refinery courtyard. Below them, the scene was already clearing. The pyramid of weeping barrels was gone, replaced by a mound of inert gray ash that looked like wet cement. The air shimmered with residual heat. The 2 mobile radiological stabilization units were already moving out. Their massive treads chewed up the asphalt, engines rumbling with a deep, authoritative bass. Jax watched as Captain Vane's unit pivoted near the gate. Vane didn't look back at the mess he'd cleaned up. He was already looking at his data pad, likely receiving coordinates for the next manifestation, the next nightmare to be erased. "They look invincible, don't they?" Elio said, leaning his elbows on the railing. He sounded small against the noise of the departing tanks. Jax pulled a crushed pack of synthetic tobacco from his pocket, though he didn't light one. He just rolled the cylinder between his fingers. "That's the point, kid. They want you to think they're gods, but they're just janitors with bigger brooms." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the Mercus vanish into the smog of the city limits. Beyond the refinery walls, the skyline of the city rose like a jagged graph. Broken tenements huddled in the shadow of the sleek, black monoliths of the RI towers. It was a broken landscape, a world of gray upon gray. "You think it ever stops?" Elio asked, his eyes fixed on the horizon where a faint, sickly yellow sun was trying to pierce the cloud cover. "The dreaming, the waste. Vane burns it, but it just comes back tomorrow." Jax followed his gaze. He looked at the cracks in the pavement where stubborn weeds were pushing through the concrete, defying the chemical sludge. He looked at the leftovers gathering near the perimeter fence, in the distance, ragged but still standing, still watching. "The RI thinks it can solve humanity like an equation," Jack said softly. "It thinks if it subtracts enough variable x, it gets a perfect zero." Jax finally put the unlit cigarette in his mouth, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "But it's wrong, Elio. You can't delete chaos. You can bury it, you can burn it, but you can't kill it. As long as people are dreaming, the sludge comes back." Elio looked at him, a spark of something bright returning to his eyes. "So we aren't losing?" "We're still here, aren't we?" Jax clapped a hand on the boy's shoulder. "As long as we're the variables they can't solve, we're winning. Now come on, let's go find something to eat that doesn't taste like copper."